Hey guys, Tom here from the Investing with Tom YouTube channel. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoyed today's video, hit like, hit subscribe, and that way you can see future videos as well. So in my previous Q&A video, I got a question around someone asking if they should invest in gold in order to protect themselves from inflation. As we know, right now, money printer goes brr, and we see a lot of those memes, but in all reality, there's a lot of new money going into circulation, and a lot of people really are concerned about the potential for a large amount of inflation moving forward that can really wipe out a lot of the purchasing power that they have from maybe cash sitting around or something like that. So in that video, I said that I prefer to take more of the Warren Buffett stance of investing in high quality businesses with pricing power in order to protect myself from inflation, rather than investing in a non-productive asset like gold. And one of the businesses that I brought up in that example was CocaCola. It's a business that Buffett himself is obviously heavily invested in and has been for a long time. And it's one that he talks about actually in terms of increasing prices over time and having pricing power over Joe's Cola and so on. So I wanted to sit down and actually go through some of the actual numbers for Coca-Cola. Go back, see how the price of Coke has changed over time and how that has compared to the change in purchasing power of the dollar. And I also sat down and did the same thing for Apple with their main product, that being the iPhone. So I went back over the last 10 years for the base kind of model iPhone, found all the prices and everything and how that's changed. I also went right back to the 1940s for Coca-Cola, which is actually really hard to find information for what Coke costs back in the 1940s because it varies, depending on where you are in the world, on what type of, serving you get, whether you get a big 2-liter bottle like many people buy today, or whether you get a glass bottle or a 6-pack of cans or whatever. But I've tried to go back and adjust it so that everything's on like a per liter basis for Coca-Cola, and literally compare it against the dollar. So I'm going to put up some charts here shortly, and we can talk through just how well these businesses have kept up with inflation and how they've been able to leverage their brand and so on in order to increase their prices over time and protect their investors from inflation. I'm going to put a graph up on the screen here, and if we look back to the Coca-Cola price in 1944, you'll see that it would have set you back around 15 cents per litre. This is all US dollar denominated figures, and again there might be some kind of margin for error here with different servings and so on, but I've tried to make it as consistent as possible. And you'll see that over time that price has steadily grown, particularly in the last decade. So if you want to purchase a litre of Coca-Cola today, by my research, that is going to cost you about $2.30 US cents. Whereas if we compare that to inflation, something that would have cost you about $1 back in 1944 is going to cost you right around $15 today. And that is basically the exact same increase from 1944 to today with Coca-Cola and with what you would have to spend in terms of the number of dollars to get the same amount of general goods. So over a long period of time, Warren Buffett has been correct on Coca-Cola. Over an extended period of time from the mid-40s through to today, the price of Coca-Cola has largely kept up with inflation. You'll see that through the middle there is a large gap. So I want to just talk briefly about what's going on there. So I'm certainly no expert on the history of Coca-Cola or anything like that. I don't collect Coca-Cola bottles, and I frankly haven't been around since the 1940s. But what I do know is that through that period, that is when I would say the Coca-Cola versus Pepsi war was probably at its peak through the 80s and 90s. And it's also frankly when inflation was cranking along as well. And I think one of the key components around pricing power for a business is their competitors, the competitive landscape. So, if Coca-Cola was the only cola beverage company on the planet, they would be able to move their prices up much more smoothly than they were able to, particularly through the 80s and 90s when they had massive competition from Pepsi. Now, of course, even with Pepsi around, Coca-Cola was able to charge a lot more than Joe's Cola or Bob's Cola or Mary's Cola or whatever sort of home store brand that someone on the street just made in their backyard or whatever. They were still able to charge much more than that. So they certainly still had this brand power and this pricing power over the everyday sort of alternative. But they did have this fierce competition between Coke and Pepsi. And I think that's something that is really important to understand if you are looking for a business that is going to have some sort of pricing power over time. Really, just by looking at the simple analysis of Coca-Cola, we know that we need two main things for pricing power. The first one is that we need a strong brand which people will be willing to pay a premium for over a generic brand, in this case Coca-Cola versus Joe's Cola. And the second thing we need is ideally minimal competition. The perfect business really, if you were to own one, would be a monopoly. Unfortunately for investors, that is not the case, and fortunately for consumers, that is not the case with many types of businesses. But competition will hurt your margins over time, and if you don't have some sort of sustainable competitive advantage in order to outcompete everybody else, that can hurt you, and that's what we see through a long stretch of time in the 80s and 90s here with Coca-Cola. And another type of business that sort of competition between Coke and Pepsi really reminds me of is actually the battle between Microsoft and Apple. For a long period of time, when computers were still very, very new, there was a lot of competition to, be the main software provider for everyday Americans, particularly at the start, but everyday people all around the world. Some people went towards Apple and they, dove into the whole Mac world and everything like that. Some people went towards Microsoft, and in the early days, there was a lot of kind of switching back and forth. I know that I went to a number of different schools as I was growing up, and that was from sort of the early 2000s through to 2012 is when I finished school, and there were still people kind of flip-flopping at that time between those two operating systems. But I find that when you look out at this sort of landscape today, there's a lot more people sort of fixed on their specific choice of software. So for me, I pretty much only ever use Microsoft software besides my iPhone, but in terms of just using a computer, I pretty much always just use Microsoft operating systems. I'm running Windows 10 on all my computers, and I have a lot of friends that will only ever use Apple, and I feel as though there's not as much kind of jumping back and forth as there was 10 or 20 years ago, and I think that is largely what we've seen probably with the likes of Coca-Cola as well. So that's something that really that reminded me of. For a period of time, there was this competition, really fierce competition, while everyone kind of figured out what their preference was. And now that that's sort of out of the way, I think both of those businesses have been able to push their prices up over time. So next, let's have a look at Apple. So if we go back to 2007, Steve Jobs comes out, does this presentation where you can touch your music and you can scroll through and all this stuff, which the crowd just went crazy for, which I think is a hilarious presentation if you go back and watch it today, by the way. But at the time, it was a game changer. And at the time, the price of that Apple were charging for an iPhone was also a game changer. You see people like Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft at the time, literally laughing at the price Apple were trying to charge for the iPhone.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine. Now,
and he couldn't actually have been more wrong about how successful the iPhone ended up being. So back in 2007, base iPhone would have set you back around $499 US. If we fast forward through to say 2010, that had gone from $499 to $599. If we go to 2015, that had gone from $599 to $649. And if we fast forward through to 2019, that had gone from $649 to $999 for the base iPhone. Now, one of the other things Apple did is they brought out lower spec models as well. So this wouldn't necessarily be true for these later years if you were to include the iPhone R, I think it is, and those sorts of things. I'm no tech expert, but I've gone with sort of the top end model of iPhone. So, looking at the iPhone X and iPhone Pro or whatever it's called now, but looking at kind of the base specs on it, so the lowest memory and so on. I haven't gone for those cheaper models of iPhone, just in case you're wondering here and you're wondering where I got these numbers from. So if I put that graph up on the screen again here, you'll see that largely the iPhone has kept up with inflation extremely well. You'll see that it started to veer off a little bit from sort of 2010 through to 2016, and this is a period of time where I think Apple really was having a strong focus on just cranking up their market share as high as possible. Sort of reminds me of what sort of a Disney Plus type service are trying to do at the moment. They're not charging as much as their competitors, they're not charging as much as, say, Netflix. They're really trying to get as many people in the door as possible, get as many people hooked on Disney Plus as possible, or in this case, Apple getting people hooked on iPhones and trying to get a really high market share. So they were sort of more conservative through those early years with pushing their prices up. But now that they've got people like me completely hooked on their iPhone, and I'm never going to change away unless something dramatic really shifts in the landscape of products that are available. You know, if I have an iPhone break, Apple can pretty much probably charge as much as they want, and I'm still going to go get it. I'm not going to switch across to a Samsung or Huawei or, you know, any other brand that has sort of comparable features. I'm just, you know, so used to using an iPhone at this point. It's easy to get my data across, all that kind of stuff has kind of all been able to get combined together in order for them to keep ramping up their prices. So from 2017 into 2018, 2019, we saw some big price increases, and they were very quickly able to close that gap between the base price for an iPhone and the level of inflation over the past decade or so. There you have it. Those are two quite different businesses. Each of them sit in Warren Buffett's portfolio as quite a substantial percentage, particularly Apple at the moment. And both of them have these beautiful, powerful brands that allow the businesses to charge much more for their products over time. And I personally think that that is a fantastic way to protect yourself from inflation. Rather than buying an inanimate object that is not going to produce anything over time like gold, I'm sorry if I just offended any gold bugs out there, being able to buy productive businesses that become more productive over time in general, and also have the ability to push prices up should they need to in order to keep up with inflation, in order to keep generating money from their operation. So that's my thoughts on inflation and how I prefer to kind of keep up with it. I hope you did enjoy the video and that was somewhat insightful. If you did, please hit like and hit subscribe. You can watch some older videos over there. Hit subscribe over there if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.